Number 10. Dr. Doom and Arrogance. Dr. Doom has the ability and the resources to take over the world, and actually has done so, but he is completely incapable of conceiving of himself as having made any mistakes or having any flaws of any kind. This makes him a horrible ally in any villainous alliance, since he feels a compulsion to be in complete control at all times, and will often find his plans undone by some minute detail or distraction. It's because everything just has to be so perfect. Everybody has to be able to laugh at themselves, hero or villain. Number 9. The Sandman and Cement. This Spider-Man villain can transform his body into sand with all of the earth manipulation and lung clogging abilities that entails. However, with Sand's abilities, there also come some hindrances, such as the potential that materials will combine to harden you into cement. Once this did occur to him, rendering him immobile and comatose. And it's not the only time people have mixed chemicals into him. That would freak me out. I don't think I'd want to take my sand form very often. Number 8. The Red Lanterns, and never being able to take off their rings. During the Jeff Johns run on Green Lantern, the color spectrum was introduced / expanded upon in the Green Lantern mythos. Rings based on emotion were detailed and assigned, and red was anger, and they started off murderous and villainous. The red rings seized on the anger of the wearer and replaced their heart, making it useless. The blood is then expelled from the wearer in a torrent of rage. Basically, they vomit the blood back up at you. The ring also initially rendered its wearers near mindless, as they were so blinded by rage. So basically, the red ring, not the best deal. It's true the red ring has since been developed, but it still comes with some pretty I can never take this off style clauses. So if you take the ring off, well, most species can't live without a heart or blood. Still better than the hope ring, I guess. That one didn't even work without being near a green ring.
Number 7. The Laughing Bandits and their gluttony. While supervillain may be a bit of a stretch for these guys, they showed that their greed extended particularly to tasty treats, namely fruit pies. These bandits would spray people with laughing gas and steal from them while they were incapacitated. One day they tried to steal some pies from a merchant. Unfortunately for them, as they went to take the pies, he revealed himself to be Superman and he caught them. This was such a ridiculous story, partly because the bad guys were defeated because they loved treats, and partly because it was an ad for Hostess. They literally said things like, "Boy, I love these Hostess fruit pies. That's cause of the light creamy crust. Yum! Maybe it's cause of the real fruit filling." Speaking of which, Hostess, the tasty snack that will hopefully give me money for plugging them.
Number 6. DEADSHOT and a Death Wish. DEADSHOT is actually suicidal and feels his existence has no real value. This makes him a huge asset to the Suicide Squad, as he literally lives up to the team's name and he's down for any mission. But it also means that the chance of success varies. His skills mean he usually comes back alive, but his suicidal tendencies means it's not often unscathed. He once let the Green Lantern shoot him in the neck to get a good shot. His own life is simply not paramount, so if you need information or for him to survive the mission, maybe give the important documents to somebody who has a bit more of a sense of self-preservation, because there's a good chance that one of these days DEADSHOT isn't coming back.
Number 5. FLORONIC Man. His weakness is super forgetfulness. FLORONIC Man, it seems, has the power to become a plant. When he's decapitated, he grows into the nearest plant, a marijuana plant. He then uses his new pot powers to start selling cheap weed in Gotham. But as you would expect, his new power comes with certain side effects. One of which is, unsurprisingly, forgetfulness, causing him to forget even important things like why he went to Gotham in the first place. Plus, he makes so many terrible weed jokes that it may as well be considered a weakness. Even though he's normally a jerk, FLORONIC Man did briefly act as a hero. You remember how SNOWFLAME was defeated by the cocaine being extracted from him and his henchmen? Well, guess who absorbed it? That's right! Even though he ended up getting his head chopped off by Batman, at least FLORONIC Man was able to do something right before he died.
Number 4. BRAINIAC and GERMS. While everyone makes fun of this War of the World style weakness, it actually makes sense. Aliens would be susceptible to our microbes and bacteria, especially an alien like BRAINIAC, who lives his life encased in sterility, rarely actually physically interacting with the worlds he is absorbing. Even a human baby will be more susceptible to germs and disease if you sterilize everything around them. So yeah, break his containment suit if he's wearing one, or just get him into the muck and fuss of daily life, cough on him, lots of choices. In some depictions he's even a germaphobe, which definitely bumps coughing on him up the list.
Number 3. Absorbing Man's weakness is also his power. He takes on the properties of any material he comes into contact with. Given these powers by Loki, the criminal Carl Creel then went out to wreak havoc with his new powers. Now, this ability is often useful and rather versatile, allowing him to even combine certain materials, but this power does have certain drawbacks and often leads to his defeat. For example, he was once tricked into absorbing the power of what he thought was Thor's hammer, but which turned out to be a cardboard replica of the hammer. Or by tricking him to turn to water, which apparently messes with his brains. All in all, even though he's actually a pretty cool villain, his power is also a huge weakness.
Number 2. Black Adam and being unable to revert to mortal form. For those granted powers by the wizard Shazam, they can change in between their powered enhanced forms and their mortal ones by shouting the word Shazam. However, their mortal bodies are still aging and moving through time. Black Adam found himself corrupted by this power, unwilling to relinquish it and using it to rule. However, because he has stayed in this form for so long, he can never return back to his mortal form of Teth Adam in most incarnations, as he is simply too old. Reverting to that form would just kill him. So I guess he has no other choice but to go on being a power-hungry despot. And our number 1. The Joker and the death of Batman. The Joker is Batman's opposite and spends nearly all of his energy obsessing over him and trying to find ways to get him to pay attention to him. So it should be no surprise that in stories where Batman is dead, appears dead, or retires, the Clown Prince of Crime doesn't fare too well. In one story, this occurrence led to him becoming completely sane until Batman re-emerged. In another, he remained catatonic until an aged Batman returned to the crime-fighting scene. It is heavily implied that without Batman, the Joker has no purpose. This renders him a bit shady in a team-up where Batman has to be taken down. It also means that he has a hard time maintaining focus on any plan not involving Batman. He will also try to actively stop other villains who are looking like they're about to succeed at taking Batman down. I mean, he pushed Harley out of a window for having a better plan than him.
You always take shots from folks who just don't get the joke.
Number 10. Miss Arrow and birds. After Peter Parker's body was eaten by pirate spiders, they then formed into the body of a female, Miss Arrow. Since she was only created because Spider-Man was supposed to die, she set out to finish the job and kill Spider-Man for good. She put up a pretty epic fight and may have defeated Spider-Man, but he managed to lure her into an aviary where a bunch of birds ate her up, one spider at a time. Gross. You'd think with all her powers she could fight off a few birds, but I guess you'll forgive a person made out of spiders for being afraid of birds. Number 9. Sweet Tooth. His weakness is the fact that he could have chosen any weapon he wanted, and he chose to throw candy at his enemies. Seriously, it's like he was trying to be the worst villain ever. If you just gave me a description of him as a guy who throws candy at people and wants to turn a river into chocolate, he sounds more like Willy Wonka than a supervillain. It took about 2 seconds for him to be captured by Batman, and he should just be ashamed. Number 8. Armless Tiger Man and his lack of arms. This one's a bit obscure, but a lot hilarious. An early Marvel villain, Armless Tiger Man first appeared in Marvel Mystery Comics number 26. Gustav Hertz is a German guy who lost both his arms in a mechanical accident and so hates all machines. So naturally, the Nazis sent him to America to destroy American machines with his feet. Now, while he has great dexterity with his feet and razor-sharp teeth, his lack of arms is definitely a drawback. So if you're ever looking to defeat Armless Tiger Man, do pretty much anything that requires arms, I guess.
Some more limitations at number 7. Loki and his power lock. This was a lock placed on Loki's abilities by Odin to stop him from being able to kill Thor or humans. When he did find a way to use his full powers, this typically resulted in Odin finding his location and could lead to a full removal of his abilities. As a result, this pretty much forced Loki into the role of either trickster or master manipulator, but it does lower some of the risk factor in straight up combat, but only in a head-on fight. Dealing with illusions and doppelgangers in battle is difficult, and with Loki that will always be a factor. I don't know why they used to make fun of him, those are the best tactics. Every team needs a mage. Every RPG player knows this.
Number 6. SNOWFLAME and a lack of cocaine. And explosions, I guess. SNOWFLAME is a drug lord supervillain who draws his abilities from the miraculous power of cocaine. Yeah, who says comic books set bad examples for kids? Doing cocaine makes SNOWFLAME significantly stronger and makes him impervious to pain, which sounds about right for cocaine. But if he runs out or has it extracted from his body somehow, he loses his powers, which is a pretty serious weakness. But he ended up dying in a big explosion, so I guess his secondary weakness is huge explosions. How shocking. Number 5. Devil Hulk and his lack of friends. Devil Hulk was introduced while Bruce Banner was venturing into his own mind to get rid of Guilt Hulk. After Banner refuses to make a deal with Devil Hulk, he is later awakened and escapes from the prison within Banner's mind due to the experiments of John Riker. It looks like Devil Hulk might gain control, but Banner makes a deal with the other Hulks, Savage, Grey, and Professor Hulk, and together they defeated Devil Hulk, forcing him to remain behind the scenes in Banner's mind. Devil Hulk seems to be the strongest version, at least mentally, as it takes the power of several Hulks to hold him. Luckily, he's kind of a dick and has no friends to help him, because otherwise there's a good chance he would start wrecking havoc in the real world. Number 4. Big Wheel and his lack of driving ability, and his apparent addiction to villainy. After being blackmailed by Rocket Racer, Jackson Wheel asked the Tinker to make him a giant wheel device to fit his new persona of Big Wheel, which was inspired by Rocket Racer's nickname for him. Unfortunately, he was pretty terrible at driving it and ended up sinking it in a river. He was thought to be dead, but it turned out he escaped, but was later sent to prison for embezzlement, where he joined Vil-Anon, which is basically Alcoholics Anonymous for supervillains. He actually tries to help Spider-Man on a mission as part of his 12-step program, but it turns out he's a terrible hero as well, so he stops. It's too bad, because the Wheel is actually pretty sick. Unfortunately, he's just such a bad driver that we never really get to see the Wheel in action.
Number 3. Mr. MXYZPTLK saying his own name backwards, and I just struggled for so many takes to even say it forwards. He first appeared way back in Superman number 30 in 1944 as an annoyance to Superman, a trickster-style character of varying degrees of villainy from the 5th dimension. Superman had to use his smarts to trick Mixie, yes that is the official short form of his name, back into his home dimension, by getting him to say his name backwards, which is Mr. Killpitsism. You would think it was such an unnatural thing to say, it wouldn't happen too often, but this near omnipotent imp would be sent back time and time again by his own name, which is a good thing because when he goes into full god villain mode, it's absolutely terrifying.
Number 2. Turner D. Century and his complete lack of technological ability. Clifford Michaels was raised by his stepfather who made him believe he was living in the early 1900s. When he found out the truth, he of course got angry and became a supervillain, because why not? After determining that young people suck, he builds a device called the Horn of Time, which is meant to kill anybody under the age of 65. Problem is, he's terrible with technology and it doesn't work. Dang nabbit. Number 1. Asbestos Lady. And her weakness? Prolonged exposure to asbestos. This one's kind of self-explanatory and amazing. In the 1940s, people didn't really know about the effects of asbestos over a long period of time. Marvel needed a supervillain to defeat the Human Torch, and what better way to defeat a fire hero than a woman covered in fireproof asbestos? To defend herself and her henchmen against fire, she makes asbestos-lined clothes. How is she eventually killed? By lung cancer at age 45 due to asbestos poisoning. Yeah, that's about right. Number 10. Brain Drain and his programmability. After barely surviving a falling meteorite, Werner Schmidt's brain and eyes were put into a robotic body by aliens. The procedure gave him the ability to control the minds of others. After many heists, he's eventually defeated by Squirrel Girl, who takes advantage of his outdated technology. However, she realizes that Brain Drain is only being evil because of his programming. After Squirrel Girl and her roommate upgrade him with modern technology, he awakes and reveals that he intends to turn over a new leaf, and he goes on to audit computer science classes. He had a lot of catching up to do. Number 9. Ruby Thursday and her inability to turn her head human. Ruby Thursday is a really weird villain whose head was replaced with a mass of organic circuitry. This lets her change her head into various things and even fire energy blasts from it. While this is useful, Ruby Thursday can't change her head to a human's, which makes her stick out like a sore thumb, and unable to go around in the real world. She often acts extremely seductively, which might actually work, especially against some of the more horn dog superheroes, plus she's got a pretty killer bod, but it's hard to seduce people when your head is a big red ball or a giant pair of lips. Number 8. The Ventriloquist and his disagreement with his dummy. Arnold Wesker, the ventriloquist, commits crime with his gangster dummy Scarface, named after Al Capone. Wesker developed dissociative identity disorder after seeing his mother killed by thugs and began treating the dummy as his other identity. The dummy side of his personality was skilled at criminal strategizing and carries a small Tommy gun. And while these two generally work fairly well together, there are times where they disagree. Rather often, their arguing ends up leading to their defeat, making this a pretty important weakness. As a side weakness, Scarface is unable to pronounce the letter B because the ventriloquist has trouble making a B sound without moving his mouth, which is pretty unfortunate when you're fighting Batman. Number 7. He, she, and I guess his or her weakness would be multiple angles. Okay, here's one that's about as dated as they come. He, she was a supervillain that was half man, half woman. Like literally, one side of the body was a man, one side was a woman. And somehow people didn't notice this until it's too late. Like, he will turn to one side and seduce a man as a woman, then face him and go, "Ha, I'm part man," and beat him up and take his money. It's so stupid, and it's so easy to tell if you're not standing at just the right angle. So if a woman is making moves on you, just move slightly to one side and try to see the other side of her face to make sure she isn't the dreaded he/she. But don't actually, because that's stupid. Kind of offensive. Number 6. Microwave Man and the fact that he was going to die anyway. Louis Paget was a scientist who gave himself superpowers using microwaves, and of course became a supervillain. Seriously, why don't most of these people just pull one heist then live in luxury forever? I don't get it. Anyway, Microwave Man is eventually invited by aliens to explore the galaxy with him. When he returns to Earth, he goes to battle Superman and does pretty well since his powers had grown from his time in space. Superman devises a way to send them back in time to the time when Microwave Man wasn't so powerful. But he's messaged by the aliens saying Microwave Man was going to die after the fight anyway, so Superman just let him win so he could have a fun last hurrah. And then he died. Honestly, it'd be kind of a funny trick to just be like, yeah, you should definitely let him win, Superman. He's gonna die anyway. He's totally gonna die. Just let him win, it's fine. Psych.
Number 5. Harley Quinn and being in love with the Joker. Harleen Quinzel is a competent, intelligent woman who must often subvert herself and is placed in great danger and outright abused because of her love for the psychopathic murderer, the Joker. Harley has to be careful to not overstep her place, as providing plans that are too good, not laughing at the appropriate times, or even being funnier than the Joker can result in a swift kick or even getting shot. While people argue back and forth as to the true nature of their relationship, one thing is certain: being with the Joker and her constant willingness to go back to him puts her in danger. And during her solo runs and issues, she has proven herself to be a far more competent villain without him.
Number 4. The Gambler, whose weakness was also his greatest vice, gambling. Stephen Sharp III took to crime after his girlfriend ran off with another man who had just won a bunch of money. Unlike a lot of villains on this list, the Gambler was actually pretty competent, having developed skills with guns, throwing knives, and disguises during his time at the circus. He was one of the founding members of the Injustice Society. However, as his name suggests, the Gambler isn't the most cautious person, even taking to standing next to his own wanted posters to draw attention. These daring and stupid actions led him to being defeated many times. But what eventually caused his demise was losing all his money in a rigged casino. Crushed by this defeat, he killed himself, leading his granddaughter Rebecca to a life of villainy as Hazard. Not only was this a fitting death, but it was a pretty good public service announcement about the dangers of gambling addiction. Number 3. The Ten-Eyed Man, and his weakness of gloves, I guess. Philip Reardon, an army veteran, was working as a security guard when a group of thieves tried to break in. Batman arrives to fight them, but Reardon mistakes him for a thief and fights him and ends up blinded by burned retinas. After a doctor changes his optic nerves to go to his fingertips, Reardon decides to go after Batman, who he blames for his blindness. Now that he can see with his fingers, his blindness is less of an issue, but like, if he's making a fist or holding something or has something covering his hands, guess what? He's blind, and that's pretty easy to deal with. I'd probably stick to kicking rather than punching, at least I could still be able to see. Number 2. The Blob and his head. Fred Dukes is a mutant, often fighting against the X-Men, whose mutation granted him incredible mass, which gave him super durability and strength. While he is pretty darn tough all over his body, his face lacks this protection, leaving him vulnerable to attacks to the head, eyes, and ears, as well as to psionic and psychic attacks. Basically, if you're fighting the Blob, aim for the less blobby parts and you'll be fine. Although he was depowered in the Decimation event, so now you'll be really fine. Except you may be emotionally scarred by how he looks now. Ugh. Number 1. Russian Zod and the Yellow Sun. This third incarnation of Zod was the son of 2 Russian cosmonauts whose ship was too close to Kal-El's spaceship, giving Zod Kryptonian radiation poisoning. This gave him incredible powers when under a red sun, but in a weakened state under a yellow sun. Basically the opposite of Superman. When he tried to turn the sun red and take Superman's place, he was thwarted by Supes and Lex Luthor, with Lex saving Superman with a blast of yellow solar radiation. As Zod goes in for the final attack at super speed, the sun turns yellow and Yeah, definitely a weakness. Number 10. Omega Red and his need to kill. Arkady Rossovich started as a serial killer and already had an unquenchable thirst for murder. But after being implanted with carbonadium tentacles by the Soviet government, his desire to kill becomes necessary for his survival. Since the carbonadium slowly poisons his body, Omega Red has to drain the life force from his victims in order to keep himself alive. While this may not sound like a problem, considering his love for killing is so great, there are times when one just wants to lay low. But it's hard to lay low when you actually have to keep killing people, which sometimes leads to his defeat, eventually being killed at the hands of Wolverine. Number 9. Osiris and his weakness to high order magic and lightning. Osiris was given the power of the ancient Egyptian gods by Master Sorcerer Black Adam. Rather than his powers being linked to Shazam, they're linked to Black Adam himself, so he has to yell, "Black Adam!" to change form. Really doesn't have the same ring to it, but it could be worse. You could have to say, "Eugene Fitzherbert," or Donald Trump. Actually, that last one would be pretty funny. While Osiris has significant resistance against most magic, he is weak against high order magic. It does, however, take significant ability in the arts to be able to harm him that way. Furthermore, lightning has been found to revert Osiris back to his mortal form. In his mortal form, he's paraplegic, which is a bit of a weakness if you're trying to be a supervillain. Number 8. ANNIHILUS and his paranoia about the cosmic control rod. First appearing in Fantastic Four Annual number 6, ANNIHILUS has been from time to time the leader of the negative zone, controlling it with his cosmic control rod, which gives him the ability to manipulate matter at a molecular level and grants him immortality. However, since he depends on the rod so much, he is incredibly worried about someone taking it. He is straight up paranoid about losing his rod, and the odd time that he does lose it, he freaks right out. This is understandable considering it's the thing that's keeping him alive, but his obsession often causes problems for him. Plus, he's a terrible tactician. He always assumes that the best course of action is just to overpower his adversaries.
In the number 7 spot is Claw. Ulysses Claw was a son of Nazi Colonel Fritz Claw, who became an assassin in his adulthood. He was also a physicist working on a sound transducer, and in order to power his device, he steals the metal vibranium from the nation of Wakanda. The metal transformed him into a being made of living sound, but it also became his greatest weakness. When in the vicinity of vibranium, he runs the risk of having the vibranium absorb his energy form and cause him to collapse.
Number 6. Maximus and his insanity. As a child, the inhuman Maximus was subjected to the Terrigen mist that altered his DNA, causing him to mutate and develop psionic powers. He gains incredible intellect and mind control abilities, allowing him to influence the actions of others, or even cause short-term amnesia. Unfortunately for him, as with most supervillains, Maximus is frickin' insane. Unlike some other villains, however, he has trouble keeping himself in check, often doing completely irrational things just for the hell of it, even if it goes against what he's trying to accomplish. While he is able to be in control much of the time, his occasional bursts of insanity are a huge weakness.
Next up in number 5 is Bizarro. There are several versions of Bizarro floating around out there in disjointed continuity, but they all follow the general trend of being Superman clones gone kind of wrong. Bizarro typically is the polar opposite of Superman, so oftentimes finds himself in opposition to the superhero. Instead of being weak to green kryptonite, Bizarro is felled by blue kryptonite, which was also created as a clone kryptonite. The green variety has actually been seen to power Bizarro on occasion.
Number 4. Hela and her dependence on her cloak. Hela is the Asgardian god of death, bringing death to everyone she touches. While generally remaining on Asgard, she has been known to travel to other worlds as well. She's an incredibly powerful being, able to kill with a touch and age someone with mystic bolts. While Hela seems perfectly healthy when wearing her cloak, if the cloak is taken away, it's revealed that the whole left side of her body is dead and decaying. Plus, if her cloak's taken away, she loses a lot of her physical strength as she withers to her real shrunken form. While she's obviously crazy powerful, it's definitely a significant weakness to rely on a cloak so much.
In the number 3 spot, we have Poison Ivy. Dr. Pamela Eiley was used by her professor as a test subject for various toxin and poison injections, which eventually led to her transformation into Poison Ivy. Just like the plants she loves, she requires solar energy to maintain her life force. If she is kept away from the sun for too long, she grows weak. This is one weakness I can relate to. I will literally lay in the sun for hours.
Number 2. Azazel and Shiarafim Blood. First appearing in Uncanny X-Men number 428, Azazel's the leader of the Neophim, a demonic mutant group that was banished to another dimension after their defeat at the hands of the Shiarafim. He is incredibly powerful with unrivaled teleportation powers, immortality, the ability to bend the wills of others, and more. He does, however, have a few weaknesses. First, as with all Neophim, blood of Shiarafim is harmful to him, causing his body to break down. Second, he can only move between dimensions with the use of his children, leading him to be rather often stuck where he'd rather not be, and with many of his plans thwarted by Nightcrawler. Number 1. Darkseid and Radion. Like all the new gods, Darkseid is an incredibly powerful being who is near indestructible, super strong, and immortal. However, he also shares the weakness of the new gods, namely a weakness to the substance Radion. Darkseid has taken advantage of this weakness when attacking and killing some other new gods, but it has also been used against him, like when he was shot by Batman with a Radion bullet. Is it kinda lazy to basically have a new god kryptonite? Who's to say? But his storylines are pretty cool, so I'll forgive any laziness with the weakness.
In the number 10 spot, we have Doomsday. In the hellish days of Krypton where only the strongest could survive, Doomsday was made by having a baby killed over and over again and harvesting all the surviving parts and putting them together to create a super strong evolved creature. Whatever kills Doomsday in his prior life he becomes immune to in the next, so it's pretty hard to get rid of this guy. However, subatomic disintegration of his particles and scattering them across space and time will greatly slow down his regenerative abilities. Keep that plasmatic beam handy. Coming in at number 9 is Fin Fang Foom. Fin Fang Foom is a shape-shifting alien hailing from the world Kakarantara. That is a mouthful. His race originally intended to conquer Earth by shifting into human forms and studying carefully human weaknesses, as if those were hard to find out. But turns out we have discovered Foom's weaknesses as well. There is an unidentified Chinese herb that, when placed in Foom's vicinity, will put him into a very deep sleep. So we've kind of figured it out. Kind of unidentified, not really. Next at number 8, we got Sabretooth. Victor Creed was originally portrayed as a regular serial killer with no superpowers, but this version was traded in for the mutant that we see fighting with Wolverine frequently. And to compete with Wolverine, he has himself a powerful healing factor, sharpened senses, and sharp fangs and claws. Though he's extremely hard to subdue because of the healing, he is vulnerable to the Muramasa blade, a sword constructed with a piece of Wolverine's own soul. Off with his head.
Number 7. Lizard and cold temperatures. Lizard is weakened by cold with reduced strength and speed. This weakness is taken advantage of time and time again by his foes, particularly Spider-Man. This stems from his reptilian DNA, as reptiles tend to slow down as temperature drops. This is a particularly important weakness as it's relatively easy to abuse by others, unlike certain other weaknesses on this list.
Coming in at number 6, we have Magneto. The famed archenemy of the X-Men had his experiences shaped by everything he went through as victim of World War II. He strongly believes that mutants are dominant over humans and has no problem using his magnetic powers to enforce his ideals. But when there is no metal around to manipulate, there isn't much he can do. His weakness to non-metallic objects has been exploited several times, such as when he is placed in a plastic prison in X-Men Days of Future Past.
Number 5. Ajax. Or as Deadpool would say, Francis! Francis Fanny is a subject and perpetrator of the Weapon X program, with increased strength, healing, and immunity to pain. He's cruel and vindictive, mostly fighting against Deadpool, but he does have one big weakness. He can be rendered immobile by activating an implant in his spine. And while it may be hard to activate, if you do, he becomes absolutely useless. Plus his name's Francis, which could arguably be considered a weakness in itself. Only Frank Underwood can pull that name off.
Up next at number 4 is Juggernaut.
Don't you know who I am? I'm the Juggernaut!
The stepbrother of Professor X enlisted in the military and on one occasion discovered the Crimson Gem of Sidorak, a stone that grants him his superhuman abilities and creates the Juggernaut. Though he is invulnerable to most attacks, removing his helmet leaves him vulnerable to mental assault from psychics. He can construct a new helmet with any available raw material, however, so psionics need to act quickly on this guy.
Number 3. The alien symbiote and sonic attacks. The alien symbiote that originally attached to Peter Parker is weak against sonic attacks. This means that its hosts are weak to these attacks, which can cause the symbiote to leave the host. Venom, Anti-Venom, and Carnage are all thus weak to these attacks and can be contained in sonic containment cells if the attacks don't work, as Spidey and the Fantastic Four do to Venom. A further weakness of the symbiote is that it is limited in mass, and so it can only be used so much before becoming exhausted. Spider-Man took advantage of this by tricking the symbiote into using more webbing than it should have, stretching it too thin and making it easier to defeat.
Coming in at number 2 is Ares. Ares is a villain based on the Greek god of the same name, and just like the god he is named after, he tries very hard to bring forth his vision of eternal war. And the reason behind this is that Ares requires worshippers to survive, and he can derive worship from the wars. So basically he will wither away if people ever stop bowing down to him and telling him how almighty he is. And finally, in the number 1 spot, we've got Thanos. Although it is hard to imagine, Thanos was actually quite the pacifist in his youth. However, once he reached adulthood, he became obsessed with nihilism and death. His greatest weakness, however, is perhaps the most prominent on this list. That would be himself. He is so prone to unstable emotions and low self-esteem that he feels he doesn't deserve a win, even when he is a hair away from one. Because of this, though he has conquered the universe multiple times, he does not feel worthy of this power and eventually loses.